And so when we look at a kind of mind map of all these different aspects of safeguarding intangible cultural heritage, we can see that at the very center of it all, and interconnected to all these different objects, different activities and actions, is the circle in the center. And that's all about practice. Practice, creation, maintaining, transmission. So the heart of the work of intangible cultural heritage is to ensure that the practice is somehow continued in some form. And this becomes the linkage with research, documentation, and inventory. It becomes the link to promotion, to preservation, to transmission, and to revitalization. And so in absence of that central circle, if we took away the practice and we said, all we're going to do is document it, it's enough if we just take like 1 million hours of video footage of this community doing this dance, and that will be enough. And never mind if the very last dancer dies tomorrow. Well, it's okay. We have it all on tape. We have it. It's going to be on YouTube. 1 million people will see it. It's fine. It's not fine. So the convention says that documentation is not sufficient. It's important, but it's not sufficient. We have to be able to get into the other things. For instance, the things that the SAC has been doing, trying to pass on the knowledge from people who are able to do it now to new generations who may be able to take on that knowledge and those skills and then make it their own, so adapt them to their own circumstances. And so at the level of countries, once again, because it is an international convention that countries do adopt, what do countries do? The convention says that countries have responsibilities. Once they sign this convention, they have to do a certain number of things. One of these things includes inventory making, which we'll come back to later. Secondly is to adopt policies for general safeguarding. How do countries help to promote the function of intangible cultural heritage? How do they integrate safeguarding into planning programs so that safeguarding and, say, development go hand in hand and can be linked to things like education, etc.? How do we establish competent bodies so that we have dedicated people who are trained and able to work on intangible cultural heritage? And then how do we foster studies and research methodologies? How do we also put in place all the measures that allow for the convention to become truly operational in each country? So for instance, in Cambodia or in Indonesia or in Bhutan, do we have the training institutions in place? Do we have the legal measures, the laws in place? Do we have the financial measures, the budgets in place? If we just adopted the convention, but we didn't put in place the laws, the people, the organizations, the training institutions, then the law would just remain on paper and it could never be practiced. So inventorying, what is inventorying? Inventorying is a process, I guess in its very simplest form, of coming up with a list. Is to identify intangible cultural heritage. And it says here in the convention, with a view to safeguarding. So we're identifying elements of intangible cultural heritage that we think we would like to safeguard in some way. And so how does an inventory help do so? There are, for instance, inventories where, in addition to listing the name of the dance, the practitioners of the dance, the forms of the dance, etc., it also indicates the viability and the strength of that form of practice. So how many practitioners are left? How well recognized is it? Do young people know about it? Are young people able to dance it, etc.? So this gives us a sense of how strong it is, and therefore what kinds of efforts we have to pay in order to safeguard it. There is also the aspect of community participation. So once again, inventories is one of the things that have to be done with the inputs, consent, and involvement of community groups and other relevant non-governmental organizations. The convention actually doesn't spend a lot of time talking about intellectual property issues because it was reserved for future conventions and other standing legal frameworks like the things that WIPO has put together, which is the World Intellectual Property Organization. But it does say that, for instance, in the process of inventorying, it must respect customary practices governing access to specific aspects of ICH in collecting, archiving, or disseminating information. What is the So what do these inventories look like? How big are they? What are their scope? What is their purpose? Inventories can be drawn up at various levels. They could be national, so like an inventory of intangible cultural heritage for Thailand. Or they could be regional, or they could be local, so just for Lamphun province. They may include all ethnic and social groups within an area, or they could be very targeted to just one group. So for instance, if you were to make an inventory in Lamphun and you decided to focus on the Taiyong group, that could be one way of doing an inventory. It may include all age groups or only some. But it does say that it should cover heritage elements that are practiced by both men as well as women. What about its domains and definitions? So you remember we went through just now all the different domains, oral traditions, performing arts, etc. These are the different domains. Some countries have chosen to make all-encompassing inventories, so inventories that tackle all the different domains. And in fact, they may even include other domains that are not included within the convention itself. On the other hand, other places may decide that it would become too challenging or too complicated or too messy to have everything included. So they can focus just on one domain. So for instance, in Thailand, they're building inventories, multiple, plural inventories, and they're focusing on one domain at a time. So they started with crafts, and then they're going to do like performing arts, and then oral traditions, and so there'll be separate inventories for all of these things. These inventories may become extremely detailed so that it's domains, and then subdomains, and then genres below that. So for instance, under performing arts, we could see that there was dance, there was music, there was songs, etc. So you could make separate mini categorizations based on that. You can also use common sense categories, so you don't have to hold to the categories that the convention lays out. It can also include not just intangible elements, but also some tangible elements that are associated with these intangible elements as well. Or tangible elements that may be present in a place. The only thing is that, and going back to this idea of living, at least from the point of view of UNESCO, the inventory should include practices that are still being practiced. So practices that have died away, that have become extinct for whatever reason, would not be included in these inventories. And so in terms of its comprehensiveness, this again very much depends on the purpose of the inventory and the time and the budget, the people you have in place to put together the inventory. And so it could be incredibly comprehensive. So every single dance that is performed in Cambodia, or it could be quite selective. We only select representative dances, say, for certain provinces, and it builds up to the national level. The only idea is that if you decide not to make it comprehensive, and you decide to make it representative and selective, then the criteria for choosing what goes in and what remains out should be quite clear and transparent, so people understand why certain things are put in and why certain things are not.